Traci Fieldsted has worked on this book for a number of years, and just working with Brent, I don't know if is there any kind of special award or?
There should be.
There should be. But I just was getting to know her this evening, and she's delightful. She currently works as an independent art consultant and historical writer-researcher, and over her career she's contributed to a number of art exhibitions and was a guest curator for the Springville Art Museum, and I noticed the Salamagundi Club in New York City. I don't know what it is, but I've eaten it.
It's the oldest American art gathering of people,
And I should know
all
that.
the great artists.
To show you my level of culture, I don't know if you could hear her, but my level of culture is the only Salamagundi I knew of was this restaurant in San Francisco called that. So, anyway, her articles have been featured in several prestigious publications, and she specializes in artists of the West. And so she has produced a wonderful tome here. It's a good-sized book, and it is chock full of just, I don't know what percentage of 1 million items that Brent reportedly has, I believe it, but a number of the things that he's collected over the years are here, and I think Traci's going to tell you how you can use this coding system in the book to learn more about some of the items that are featured there and hear Brent talk about them. It's really, really fun. I was trying to determine tonight how long I've known Brent Ashworth, and early 80s we met, and we've had a long friendship and association with one another. We're fellow victims by whoever that guy is that was out at the point of the mountain. Now he's in Gunnison. But way beyond that, Brent, when I first got to know him, I knew he was an attorney and was a company officer for, I guess it's been 2 or 3 different organizations, companies that specialize in I don't know, what do you call it?
Dietary supplements.
Dietary supplements. He has been an attorney since, I believe, the 70s. And again, that's just scratching the surface, because Brent has been heavily involved in local politics, in the Boy Scouts, in the Kiwanis Club. He's received numerous awards. He is what a lot of people may not know because they know him as a collector and some as a dealer of these kinds of materials. But he is heavily involved in charitable efforts in many respects, has helped raise money for many worthy causes. He's been on, I don't know, how many missions have you been on? A couple? 3?
4, I think.
4? He's been on 4 missions. I know. Just got back from Massachusetts. He and his wife have served there, and he was at the church historical department and helping them. He's made very generous donations of his own materials to the church and to many other worthy recipients. We've kidded with each other over time about how much stuff he has. I don't think he knows how much stuff he has. He has storage units full. He has safe deposit boxes. I mean, it's just unbelievable. He's become friends and associates with Glenn Beck, and Glenn Beck refers to Brent as a national treasure. Vern Swanson from Springville Art Museum calls him a force of nature. And that's probably where I would weigh in. Brent is a force of nature. We finally got him to come out of his shell. He's not as shy as he used to be, and I finally convinced him he could actually talk about this stuff with us. But we do go way back. One thing that, well, we were going to partner on a really good deal one time, and the fates were against us, and it didn't ever happen. But I've appreciated my long-time association and friendship with Brent. He knows so much. He tells a little bit of it in here, but we'll probably never know just how much he's experienced and what he's collected. He's had the most amazing things, and if you just thumb through this book, you'll see some treasures that are just unbelievable, and he'll talk to you about those. So please accept our gratitude for your being here and braving the weather. You're going to have a real treat tonight, and so now I'd like to turn the time over to Traci, who's actually the author of the book, and then we'll listen to Brent, and then we'll go from there. So let's see if we can hear back there now that we've got some more people. We're back a little farther. Traci, come on up and see if, tell me if you can hear her okay.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for weathering the storms and being here. Brent Ashworth, what a treasure. What a, extremely great opportunity it was to write his story. Brent is, in life you'll find that there are givers and there are takers. Brent is a giver, and his whole collection, he wants to share it with you. He wants to tell you the stories, and hopefully I picked up on a bit of that in the book, of his motivation, the way he grew up, the things that influenced him in his collection. He's been at it since he was 3 years old. He could name every car and make, and he was probably that way before birth. But the thing about Brent is that he enjoys telling the story. We had a little bit of conflict between us about the name of the book, Show and Tell. But Brent is enthusiastic, even like a 5-year-old taking his show and tell to kindergarten. Brent has never lost enthusiasm or gotten over that. And so I don't want to take up too much time because I want him to show you what he's like in his element. In the book, you'll see QR codes, and they're the squiggly little boxes. On your cell phone, you can cue that in and get hours of Brent speaking about the items in the story. And it's fascinating. It's some of the best history you'll ever see. And I was there when they filmed him. They filmed him for Glenn Beck's show, and they ended up not using the footage. But I have never in my life seen anybody who could recall every event that they took pictures of his items, and he could read and recall every event like it was happening personally, and so it was amazing. But it was it took me about it took me 4 years to write the book, a year ago, and so enjoy. I hope that you find that you like it, and that his life and his stories mean something to you. Thank you.
Well, I think you can tell that Tracy was a marvelous one to work with, and she was a great author, and she put up with me and my stories, so that she does deserve a medal for all that. Kurt, you always said our good buddy Mark said he was going to take care of his friends. I remember that quote that you coined, and it was right on, my friend, so he did take care of us. But I really love and appreciate Kurt. He's been a great friend for several decades, and it's really a great spirit, and thank you for opening up your store for us. It's been marvelous tonight. I just wanted to show and tell a few things. First of all, I got to blame my grandmother for this hobby because although I don't remember her, she died when I was just a year old. I do know that she saved every little thing that came her way, because I remember my grandfather, who outlived her, said he sure wished he could pull his car in the garage. That was when I was about 6, 7. And he didn't have the heart to go through her things and throw things away. And after he passed away, we actually had been taping up trees that morning. Any of you that are familiar with Provo, it's the west parking of the Brick Oven restaurant. Now, the home actually still exists. It was moved out to Linden. Got to go through it a few years ago because the owner at that time, Gleason and Brent, had moved it, and we became good friends. At any rate, the family came a day or two after the funeral, my grandfather, the 6 children, including my mother, who was the youngest, and they just built a big bonfire. I guess this is when you could burn in downtown Provo. And they just started tossing all of Grandma's things in it. I was only 7, but I remember wondering, what's going up in flames? You know, nobody's even looking at this stuff. And I remember Grandpa's false teeth in the ashes, among other things. And I remember, the only other thing I remember about that day, besides it was a pretty day, besides the fire, was 2 uncles fighting over a pair of brown socks. It's interesting what a 7-year-old will remember. But I asked my mother later, I said, my father was an architect. He designed a home that we moved into up on the east bench the next year, or the west bench, east bench of Provo the next year. And I asked my mother, I pestered her, I said, did you save anything of Grandma's things? We called her Nana. She says, yeah, there was one box. Says it was up in the rafters of the garage, and we saw it, but we were too busy taking care of everything else. But I had your father take it when we sold the home, and it's somewhere out in our garage. So I pestered her until we found it. And she says, now, we've never been through that box, but I'm sure it's just more junk. You can just have it. So I went through the box, and I found 12 letters and 1 document signed by Heber J. Grant. And they were all written to my grandmother back between 1931 and 33, when they'd sent my uncle on a mission to Texas. My grandmother was a convert to the church. She'd brought my grandfather into activity. He'd been baptized, but had not been active before she was converted. And I always knew him as a very active couple in the church in their older years, although I don't remember my grandmother that well. That's what I heard. And I thought, isn't this interesting? I read these letters, and all they had to do with was keeping my uncle on a mission to Texas in 31. To my grandfather, it was a matter of pride that the boy, they couldn't afford to send $25 a month to keep him out. That was standard then. He thought the boy had to come home. And my grandmother, Nana, felt differently, wrote the president of the church. It was amazing to me that he wrote back. Some of these letters were 2 and 3 pages, single space typed, you know, and with his beautiful signature at the end. And I thought, when I got done with them, you know, I know more about President Grant now than anything I'd ever heard in junior Sunday school. Wouldn't it be great, every collector starts with a set in mind, if I could collect something personal of all these church presidents? And that got me going, and I've since done it about 15 times, and it's been fun. I've collected stuff that they wrote when they were teenagers. Frankly, I would hate to see anything I wrote when I was a teenager. But it dawned on me when my son Adam, our 4th son, came back from a mission to Virginia years ago, and all our sons served missions. I count our 7-year-old who was killed in an accident, because I know he serves a mission. He told me when he got home, he says, Dad, you talk about having met church leaders and so on. He says, I've never met an apostle, even having served a mission. That got me thinking. He said, since that time he had the opportunity to meet President Monson, which was nice, but it got me thinking, and I thought, you know, if you count George Albert Smith, who my mother said shook her hand or whatever when she was holding me as a baby when Harry Truman and him were coming down the University Avenue in Provo because they saw a mother with a baby, so, you know, pulled over. If you count George Albert Smith, who I don't remember, I remember meeting all the other ones at one time or another. So I met every president of my lifetime. And I've been collecting their stuff since I was a kid. I thought that was remarkable. And the next thought that hit me was, yeah, but, you know, I've never found anything written by any of them, even when they were young people, young men, that in any way detracted from the calling they later had. And I've seen some funny things. I mean, I've seen some doodles. I saw, you know, there was an English book that George Albert Smith wrote to his girlfriend, a little, you know, thing in, but there was nothing that wasn't just normal, you know, and it was cute. And I thought, isn't that interesting? That's quite a testimony, little additional one that I have. Well, I've collected a lot of stuff since then. I started with church presidents. I collected Relief Society presidents. Collectors tend to get bored over time. And so I guess I got really bored because I collect everything now. My kids say I collect dust. It's probably true. But the fact of the matter is that I went collecting signatures of famous people in our nation's history and in the world. Now, the book has a little overview of some of those. I brought just a few today so that you can see them. This one we had at the University of Utah a year ago for a while on display, but I think you can all see Queen Elizabeth, the first signature on that one. Of course, her reign in England became a real renaissance for a lot of things. Shakespeare, for one, and the language and so on. And when you realize that her father, Henry VIII, killed her mother, Anne Boleyn, it's amazing that she was as positive a character as she was. And England flourished under the first Elizabeth. It was really a renaissance for England. And the second Elizabeth, when she came around when some of us were kids, they had high hopes for her, and I think she's lived up to many of their expectations. She's done a great job overall. So it's been kind of amazing. And let's not forget Victoria, who took the throne at age 18. The Victorian age was the time that England really ruled the world. And I've got things of all these people, but I can only pick and choose a few today. I tried to pick a few that were in the book because we have to do a lot of picking and choosing. Well, I'm going to start out with another female leader. This is well, I'll show her husband first. These are the two foreign ones I brought. I don't know if you can see Louis XVI's signature on that. It's pretty good size. He lost his head over his work. And his queen, Marie Antoinette, lost hers. And this is Marie Antoinette's signature, maybe a little small to see. But she has signed this document here. Well, to me, it's exciting to hold these things because it kind of brings history to life and it gets you thinking about things. Yesterday, I do every Tuesday when we meet at Kiwanis in Provo. I've done this for many years. A little history of the day. And yesterday was interesting because it was the anniversary of the theft of Mona Lisa, the painting. How many of you have seen Mona Lisa? Okay. Well, it's kind of hard to see. It's hard to get up close, you know, nowadays because there's usually a big crowd around it. But it's kind of amazing. But there was a little article the other day, and I shared it yesterday at Kiwanis. Just a couple of things I'll point out. The article was entitled, and you might look it up because it was really entertaining. It was worth. I read it to my wife, and I don't read her a lot of stuff because she gets bored. But I read this one to her, and she really liked it too. And it was called. It said Napoleon slept with Mona Lisa. So that immediately gets your interest up, right? And so I read the article. It was about 3 or 4 pages long, and I'm sure if you look that up, you can read it. It was just posted yesterday. And then it told the story of how the Italians have been trying to get that painting back for for ages, but they really have no right to it because Leonardo left Italy with it and took it to France. Okay, and worked on it the rest of his lifetime. He said it was probably the one painting he kept working on and tweeting all of his lifetime. But eventually, it wound up at his death belonging to Francis I, the king that Henry VIII, whose signature's in the book, attacked and took a portion of France during the early 1500s. And Francis passed it down to the kings and queens of France. And when it got down to the Sun King, Louis XIV, he really prized it by that point. It was at Versailles, and it was in a special place in the in the palace there. But when it got to Louis XV, he didn't care for it, and so he put it in a closet, basically. And Louis XVI could care less about it. I mean, he was busy losing his head. So, the point was that it came down to where nobility had lost it, and it was given to Napoleon. And Napoleon hung it in his bedroom for a while, and that was the article. And it was quite fascinating. I brought a signature of Napoleon. I don't know if you can probably see that. Napoleon attacked the paper like he attacked the world. Okay, and it was hard for them when we went to Paris years ago. Been there a couple times, but when I went with my wife and we went to his tomb. Anybody been to Napoleon's tomb in Paris? One interesting feature about it is it's down below, right? So everybody had to bow to look at Napoleon's tomb. He designed it that way. No ego. We don't know people in politics that are that way today. But at any rate, it's kind of amazing. You had to bow to Napoleon every time you go in there and look at his tomb. And that was by design. At any rate, they had a very difficult time in the Museum of the Invalids. Probably murdered that. To find a set of pantaloons, as they call them, that he wore in battle, because they were all bloody or dirty or some other thing. They finally found a pair they put in there and cleaned. But Napoleon would attack the orders. He signed thousands of orders, and his signature was very rare up until about 1961. They found a barn outside Paris that had 40,000 signed military orders, just like this, that were signed by Napoleon. Suddenly the price dropped from thousands to under $100, for one. And if you've been around in 61, I was there, but I couldn't afford $100. But you could pick one up. Now they're back up to 8,000 or 9,000. So it's all supply and demand, okay? That's the way it is in about everything in life, and there too. Well, that's enough foreign history. I've been fascinated by, of course, American history. I brought a handwritten letter of George Washington. I don't know if you can see the penmanship. Washington, usually during the war, had a scribe write for him. He dictated. He had a number of important scribes, including Alexander Hamilton, who everybody wanted to get a Hamilton letter of Washington now. But they're quite rare. At any rate, this is in Washington's handwriting. He had a much nicer handwriting than any of his scribes. Okay? But he took his time doing it right. This particular letter is the second one he sent this day. This was the 20th of June, 1780, during the middle of the war. It was still a downtime for the, all through the war, but this was not a great day. On this particular day, he'd written an earlier letter to the same man, Robert Morris, the financier of the Revolution, and he said, "Can you send me some shirts?" He says, "Some of my men don't have any shirts." Okay. In this letter, in the middle of it, and I guess because he got personal, he wrote it out, he said, "In a struggle like ours, perplexed with embarrassments, if it should be my fortune to conduct the military helm in such a manner as to merit the approbation of good men and my suffering fellow citizens, it will be the primary happiness of my life, because it is the first great object of my wishes." Interesting way of putting it, isn't it? A great way with the English language. Anyway, great man. I have another letter which I didn't bring, which is a favorite of mine, better than this one even, but it's written by a scribe, except for the P.S. And in it, it's in the book. In it, he is. When I first met Glenn Beck, he came to my store, and he had a letter to Anthony Wayne from George Washington that he was kind of touting and bragging about, and so on. And collectors like to brag, that's just part of the thing. He even had a collector's show you can see on the internet, and he invited me and what's his name from Pawn Stars, Rick Harrison, and David Barton, who works with him. The four of us threw stories around for an hour. Yeah, it's on the internet if you want to really get sick. But it's four collectors bragging about stuff. It's basically what it is for an hour. And I had been to the gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas several times. My kids taunted me to go down there and to take something metallic, preferably gold or silver, with me, and find Rick and get his impression on whatever it is. Not tell him that I was an owner of an antique type store in Provo, Utah at the time. So I went down there, but I didn't take anything of silver or gold, but I did have some metallic things, and among them were 2 medals of Ulysses Grant that came out in 1885, time of his death, and they were pretty good. They were well done, commemorative. I don't know what kind of medal they were. They weren't silver, but they were that tone, and they were in a plush velvet case. Had the original case and everything. I decided out of about 6 items I took down there I'd take that one, and this was early on when Pawn Stars first came on. So you could actually walk in the shop and occasionally find somebody working. And it wasn't a TV show as such yet. It was getting to become. And I went in the shop, and the only people I recognized, the people working there, was Chumley, if those of you that remember or know Chumley, and the old man who's since passed away. And I showed Chumley the medal. He says, "Oh, you got to take that to the old man." So I went in line. There was a line. There was a guy in front of me with a bow and arrow set. And I thought, this will be interesting. But he got rid of him. And the old man was pretty nasty. He was nastier in person, actually, than he was on the show. I think that's safe to say. And he was cussing this and that and so on. I wanted to find Rick, because Rick's the guy that's interested in history, and I couldn't see him. I made 3 trips to the pawn shop and never did see Rick, except one time when they were behind the front window, which was closed, the door. I could see him with a mic in his face, and they told me to move on. That was the only time I saw him in there. But I was in line, and the old man finally said, "This isn't silver." Like this. I did my best Steve Martin, excuse me, I didn't say it was. But where's Rick? I thought Rick might be interested in it because it was historical. He says, "Oh, he's in the back," and he was barking orders over the phone to him like he was a slave or something. Rick, I couldn't believe it. It was worse than on the show. And so I never got to meet Rick until I sat next to him on a couch on Glenn Beck's show. And that was a year or so later. Every time I went down to the little pawn shop, it got bigger. So I knew the shop was successful because they'd added an additional 40 feet to the shop. When I started, the shop was no bigger than mine in Provo, which is quite tiny. And by the 3rd or 4th time, it was starting to take up most of the block down there. And so I figured it was getting to be pretty profitable for them. But by the time I met Rick, I got invited down actually by Glenn Beck to bring a bunch of things to show to put on display for the 50th anniversary of the commemoration of the assassination of John F. Kennedy as president. And Glenn had flown up in a private plane, and he taken my wife and I to Ruth's Steakhouse, which we couldn't afford to eat at, and we had a nice dinner there. And his book had been sent to me called Miracles and Massacres. I'd gotten 2 copies of it that morning in the mail because we were arguably working on a book together and some videos and things. And the person that I was with wanted me to get a signed copy for him and for myself. Anyway, I presented him to Glenn at the restaurant, and Glenn says, "I haven't seen this book. Let me look at this book." It's just off the press. So he's looking at his own book and going through it, which was kind of comical. He told us kind of the story of his life and his conversion to the LDS faith, which I had never heard the story on the tapes and stuff. So it was interesting. Basically, he told me he was a drunk and he lost his first wife due to being stoned most of the time. And it wasn't until 9/11 that got his attention. 9/11 got his attention. He felt like life was short. I guess he was not far from there when he was doing a program in New York that day. And it got his attention. He went out looking for religions with Pat Gray, one of his friends that he's still on the air with. And they went to a lot of different religions, and ultimately he decided to join the LDS Church. But it was interesting to hear that. But he says, ever since I've been a member, and I don't want to offend anybody that's not LDS here, but I just thought it was an interesting story. He said, ever since I've been a member, Brent, and there were only 4 of us around this table at the time at the steakhouse. He said, "I've had this recurring dream of containers, you know, like they put scriptures in. What are they called? At any rate, I've had this recurring dream of these clay pots. That's it, clay pots." And he said, "I haven't known what it's meant, so I finally asked the Lord, what does it mean, clay pots? What do you want me to do?" And he says, "That's where you come in, Brent." he says, "I got it to mean that I'm supposed to help do something." That's how they preserved history in the early days, and we're not preserving our history anymore. We're not passing it on to our youth like we should. And I reach out to you to kind of help me do this. And we were going to put a book together that was going to be a freebie to the schools. It was a great idea. He had me on his show a couple times after to explain this. But it would have one picture of the artifact on one page and the letter or whatever it was, and then it'd have an explanation by Jason Wright, who you may know is an author. It's been a New York Times bestseller. He's LDS, and he came to my shop along with a film crew of about 8 people to film this. And Glenn said, "Go through your collection and pick out 50 items that have to do with miracles from American history. Then 50 that have to do with massacres," and that was the name of this book. I'd taken up Miracles and Massacres. It was a bestseller at the time for him. And I think get 50 dealing with entrepreneurs, people like Disney Ford and people like that. And then pick 50 items from your collection that deal with surprises, things we didn't know about. That was the toughest one, was that last 50, but I got them all. I typed them all up, took me a couple months, sent them in. He cut the list in half to his 100 favorite of that group. And then he sent a film crew of 8 people and a photographer to my store. They carried all the furniture out except stuck me in front of a bookcase in one of the chairs I had there. And Jason Wright was sitting in the doorway of my little office and supposedly writing the text for this, although I had to rewrite it. I don't know what he was doing. He was writing to his wife or something. But at any rate, we got through that. And it was an interesting experience, but turned out that was one of the projects that was eventually cut. And I asked Glenn, I says, well, this was a year or so later after Traci and I had been working on the book. And I said, could we have those QRs back to use them in the book? And he says, sure, you bet. So he's been very supportive. He wrote the intro to the book, and he's been a big help. He did an interview that's with me while we were on our mission a couple of months ago, and that was nice. I did a plug. Just a couple more letters. I showed you the George Washington. This is a Brigham Young letter here. This was one that was sent to a son. Imagine having 4 sons named Brigham after you. It's not quite as bad as George Foreman, but it's getting there. And so they went by their middle names, and this was Morris, Brigham Morris. So he went by the name Morris. Morris was sent to Sandwich Islands in the 1870s. That's Hawaii, and he had to learn a native language while he was there. There was a lot of natives at the time, and he was having a difficult time. Not that that's anything new for missionaries. And so his father sits down in September of 1874 and writes this letter. Let's read a little of it here. He says, I've received your 2 letters and I'm responding to them. Your difficulty in learning the language will disappear, I hope, by the study which I know full well you will give it. Never allow your courage to fail you. This is Brigham Young. Never allow your courage to fail you. Man's greatest works have been done by men of patience, perseverance, and a determined will which would acknowledge no defeat, rather than by those gifted with a natural ability which made success easy, but who lacked the tenaciousness of purpose. Then, my boy, never say fail, but work on in the way you have started, and your reward is certain. That's pretty good advice for everybody. Okay, it was a young attorney in 1859 that decided he just lost a big series of debates with Stephen A. Douglas, and he decided he was going to go to Leavenworth, which was outside his jurisdiction in Illinois, and talk to his friend Mark DeLahey, who was a political operative, about whether he should throw his hat in the ring the next year to run for president of the United States. He'd always been a congressman for 1 term, and that was it. Wasn't returned, lost about every election thereafter, and the debates to Stephen A. Douglas, who was the powerful senator from Illinois. While he was there at the DeLahey home at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, Mary, his 9-year-old daughter, came up to Lincoln and asked him if he wouldn't mind writing in her little autograph album. And Oliver Barrett, the great collector in Chicago, ended up with this piece, but it was taken out of that, and ultimately it came up for sale. I was amazed it came up because I knew what it was, and I was able to acquire it. But this is what it says: Dear Mary, with pleasure I write my name in your album. Ere long, some younger man will be more than happy to confer his name upon you, underlined. Don't allow it, Mary, until fully assured that he's worthy of the happiness. December 7th, 1859, your friend A. Lincoln. Not bad. Especially Lincoln turned out pretty good, you know, next few years. Especially did decide to run for president. That brings me to, I wanted to share something. This is my favorite autograph. It's actually from the prophet Joseph Smith, and we made a full page of it in the book. And I do believe we do have a photo of the prophet. I think it's this one we've all seen. If you blow this up, you can see his eyes are really his eyes, and you can see a button on his coat. This was doctored with after Joseph III gave his father's picture to the Library of Congress. They got doctored with because it was the only way they could get it to publish it in books at the time. And they kind of ruined the original, you know, but luckily a few copies have been made, and this is one of those early copies. Well, Joseph Smith, as you know, had gotten out of Liberty Jail. He had been told by the Lord through commandment that he was to take up the loss of their Missouri properties with the judge first, then the governor. He did both of those things, and if they refused to listen to him, to go back and talk to the national government, which he did. And we all remember he went to the Congress and to the President, Van Buren, who told him your cause is just, but I can do nothing to help you. If I help you, I'll have to help the whole state of Missouri, and that'd be a unique thing for a politician, right? So I'm glad politics has improved so much over the years. But at any rate, be that as it is, Prophet went on till they were turned down and rejected to Philadelphia. And they rented a big cathedral in Philadelphia, and finally the Church Historical Office determined which cathedral that was a few years ago. It still stands. And the Inquirer, the newspaper for Philadelphia still, I think, unless it went under, invited people to come listen to the barbarian of the West, Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet. That headline and the article got about 2,000 people to show up. I think it was the largest group Joseph Smith may have ever talked to in his lifetime. And he gave a talk, which we've only got little bits and pieces of, by Benjamin Winchester and others who were in the audience that took some notes. We don't have all of it, but what we have of it, it seemed like it would fit into General Conference in April or October, because it was all about the family, about him riding into town and seeing the men hanging out at the bars. And he told the fathers to get home to their children and the mothers to continue with the good work they're doing at home. And he stayed with a woman by the name of Susan Conrad. Her married name was Wilkinson. She was the grandmother of Ernest L. Wilkinson later. But she was not a member of the church at this time. And he stayed with her for a couple of months. He was there with Judge Higbee and others that were staying with her at her rooming house that she'd opened to these Mormons from Washington. And as they were about to leave, she asked if he would write something in her album. She had an autograph album. And the prophet wrote this in his own handwriting, which is unusual because Dean Jesse, kind of the authority on Joseph Smith's handwriting, told me years ago when I got this, he said, you know, Brent, out of about 5,000 pages we've got authored by Joseph Smith, if you discount that one little diary, there's less than 50 of them that are in his handwriting. I mean, he used a scribe for everything, and he says that in his history. In 1839, he says, I hardly ever take up the pen myself. And any of us that collect his writing know that that's true. It's rare to see his signature. And his handwriting is even worse, but at any rate, harder to see. This is all in his hand. He said, and it's got 3 distinct parts with no punctuation, kind of like the Book of Mormon manuscript. Virtue is one of the most prominent principles and enables us to have confidence in approaching our Father who is in heaven in order to ask wisdom at his hand. And then he got scriptural. Therefore, if thou wilt cherish this principle in thine heart, thou mayest ask with all confidence before him, and it shall be poured out upon thine head, and thou shalt not lack anything that thy soul desires in truth. And then he left him with a blessing. And again, the Lord shall bless this house, and none of them shall fail, because they turn not away the servants of the Lord from their doors, Even so, amen. Joseph Smith Jr. You can almost feel the inspiration, can't you, as I read that? I mean, I think it's, of course, I recognize Joseph Smith as a prophet. Some of you here may not, but I can feel the inspiration of heaven just reading that. And it's in his handwriting. It's a wonderful piece. Any rate, that's my wife's favorite too, so we've enjoyed that. A couple others real quick. This is the only known letter, or the last known letter, I should say. It's pictured in the book, of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Right before he was killed. And it's a letter written from the motel, and he's writing to the Mount Hebron Baptist Church in Pittsburgh, Kansas, thanking them, dear brothers and sisters, for their Reverend Joseph Houts, who came and helped with the struggling sanitation workers in Memphis, which is the reason he was there at the time he got shot. And it's pictured in the book. I've had the Martin Luther King Foundation in Atlanta want that letter, and it's caused me to think about it, but Glenn Beck says don't give it to him, so I don't know. At any rate, we're still thinking. I do try to build up libraries around. The Church Historical Library, I was on 2 missions up there, one of the old archives, and then I was called in after 9 months after we'd taken 100,000 items up, and I was told, Elder Ashworth, your stuff is clogging our system. And so I knew the mission was at an end, okay? And if we need you again, we'll call you when we get the new building done, but we got to know exactly what's going across the street to the Church History Library. Well, Marlon Jensen had given me his home phone number, big mistake, and he says, don't use it. This is a real emergency. Well, the emergency I found was driving back from Las Vegas. We were visiting family down there. My uncle was a bishop there and my cousins. And we were driving back one day from North Las Vegas, and I have a tendency, well, I'm trying to overcome it. One of my bad habits, among many, is to read and drive, okay? And I hate to admit that with Judge Hanson here in front of us. But my wife's almost cured me of it, and I've had a couple of near misses, so that's helped cure me too. But I get bored, and so, I like to read. And if she's in the car, she won't let me, and she'll start reading for me. Well, there was a book that came out in '08 that was done by Susan Easton Black on Emma Smith's life, and it was a paperback originally, and it had an outline of Emma's life in the front of the book. And so my wife's reading this along, and it says, March 6, 1833, Joseph writes a letter to Emma saying, Brother so-and-so, I forget his name, says we should donate our cross plow to help the poor, and I think we should do it. And he signed it, and sent it to her. And then my wife went on to a couple other entries after that, and it took me a minute or two to realize. I says, go back to that earlier entry, and she did. March 6, 1833, And I says, well, that's the first forgery I bought from Hoffman. That shouldn't be in there. So that's the first time Marlon got a phone call from me. And I said, Elder Jensen, I'm sure Susan Easton Black's a wonderful historian. I don't want to attack her. I don't know her, but a great person, I'm sure, done some great things. But this is a phony letter. And I said, if you did invite me back to serve at the new library, perhaps the first thing we ought to work on is getting Kurt and my good friend stuff out of circulation, so 20 years more from now it doesn't turn up in some history when we're gone.
We had the cross plow letter for a while too.
Yeah. So, at any rate, I didn't hear more. He says, well, that's a good idea, Brent. And that was a short conversation. A week and a half later, I get called on my second mission up there. It lasted for 7 years, the new Church History Library. And it was a little different because I got called by an email. Okay, how many people get called on a mission with an email? But Elder Jensen sent me a mission call. He said, I'm calling you on a mission, serving the new Church History Library, and I'm putting you in charge of our Mark Hoffman collection because I think you're eminently qualified. I didn't take that as a great badge of honor. Okay, but at any rate, I went up, and for the first few months, I'd go up on Wednesdays and come out on Fridays. What they really wanted me to do on both missions to take my stuff up so they could go through it. So I think they thought the first mission was long enough, but by the time they opened it up for the Church History Library, I don't know have you been upstairs on the second floor, but they have 4 long hallways down, this way it's designed. We had those stacked about 5 feet tall, each one of them. And they go down about what, 60 feet or something. And so every time I'd go up there, it was all my stuff we'd been hauling up. And they were going to go through. And every time I went up there, I'd always have one of the brethren or sisters come over and says, Brother Ashworth, can I have this book? This is one that I really need, you know. And I says, well, you can if your boss lets you, because I've given it to the church, you know. So finally they just says, well, Ashworth, you don't need to come up here. So I spent all my time in my storage units thereafter, and they just sent a truck down once a week to pick them up. Now that made it a lot easier for me, and it seemed to work out, but it really was more of a full-time mission, because when I wasn't at the store in the afternoon for a few hours, I was there picking up, going through the stuff. And my wife's always looking for places that'll take books, okay? And so she found out that the prison in Gunnison wanted to create a library. So she lined me up with the warden. I got a hold of the warden, and he says, well, yeah, I understand you got some books you want to give away. I said, I sure do. And he said, well, he was real specific about what he wanted. He said, don't want anything on guns or bombs, women or children. But he says you can bring anything else up if you want. And it's real specific. And he says, we don't care if it's old or not, just, you know, something they can read and to keep them out of trouble. So I spent all summer, like I was working for the church, I have a box. I use these U-Haul boxes because they stack up about 10 deep, supposedly, although I've been on the top of one of those piles when it came down. They're no fun. I knew what I was doing the rest of the summer when that happened. And that's happened a couple times. My kids were with me one time. I think my wife's thinks I'm going to be found dead at the bottom of one of those piles one year. But I have a lot of fun doing that. I enjoy it. And not picking up after, but you know, putting them up. But so I'd have a book for the church and a book for the prison. That's the way the summer went, you know. It's a book and the church was picking theirs up with a truck every Friday, so I didn't worry about theirs. But the prison, they didn't want to come till I had them all, and I had 2,000 boxes approximately for the prison by the end of the summer. And I was really tempted to throw one book. There was one book that was called The World's 30 Greatest Escapes. I thought, you know, if I throw that in, they're going to question everything. So I better not put that in there. So I didn't. I was really tempted. And so then I called the warden up and I said, hey, I've got your books. There's about 2,000 boxes. He says, well, good job. And the next day he came down with 2 big trucks and 4 of the biggest guys in striped suits you ever saw. And what had taken me all summer, they had cleared out of there in about 20 minutes. And I thought, man, I wish I had that manpower. My kids have long ago given up on working with their dad at the storage unit. So they all moved away. That's probably the reason. But, but the point was that it was an interesting experience. And then a couple years later, Kurt's best friend got moved there from Point of the Mountain, okay? And so it hit my funny bone really terribly, and I'm just telling you this for the first time. I thought, you know, one guy's going to use the prison library. It's going to be Hoffman, and he's going to go there, and he's going to see my name in some of those books, because some of them are mine, and some of them were stamped and some gift of. You know? I'd love to be a fly on the wall. There is some justice in the universe. I've got to end this, but anyway, I'm having too much fun. But I'm bothering Kurt. So
Did you pull all the loose front
one thing that
pages
came
out?
up, one thing that came up a few years ago. You might remember Bill O'Reilly. Anybody remember Bill? I have an interesting career. And he was a good friend of Glenn Beck's. I never knew Bill, but I knew Glenn was a good friend of his. And he wrote several books. They were called the Killing series, if you remember those. And the one that did the best was Killing Patton. It sold the most, you know. And he had Killing Kennedy, Killing Lincoln, you know. He did one on Christ that I didn't read, The Killing of Christ. But the one on Killing Patton I wanted to read because I've always been interested in Patton, and usually I get outbid by Glenn Beck on a Patton item, and it's been kind of a running gun battle between the two of us. He's got a lot more money, so he can always win. And I finally told Glenn, I says, if you're going after something of Patton's, just let me know ahead of time so I can drop out and you get it cheaper. So luckily we don't always see the same things, and this was one of those times. And what had happened was that O'Reilly come out with his book of Killing Patton, and in that book he says it's most probable, beautiful book. He has a guy that helps him, Dugar, that helps him write those books. He's a historian himself, supposedly, high school guy, historian, history teacher, and he gets a guy named Dugar that helps him look, everything up and make sure everything's correct. Whose name appears with his. And at any rate, at the end of the Patton book, he had Patton, his death by, you may recall, there was a staff car that Patton was in that was run into by a military truck. They had some drunk GIs were running, and it was after the war, a couple of months. And it was, it's kind of a sad way to lose our number one fighting general, but Patton had broken his neck as a youth. Most people didn't know that. So when he broke it this time, he knew he was in, this was probably the end of his life. As it turns out, a lot of people said there was a huge cover-up, and there was. And so there's always been a lot of speculation that Joe Stalin, who Patton was not fond of, if you remember the movie, he said, give me enough gas and I'll go take Moscow. We're going to have to fight the SOBs sooner or later. Okay? And you may recall that from the movie. There was no love lost between Joe Stalin and Patton. So some thought, and that was in O'Reilly's book, that there was a team of people that got into the hospital after he had his broken neck, because Patton lived for a week, and poisoned him. That's how he really died. And so that's how killing Patton ends. The only problem with that is there were no military records that survived the Great Fire, GSA fire in St. Louis in 1973. All the military records from World War I, World War II, some of Korea and Vietnam were all destroyed by a huge fire. And it's amazing they didn't have microfilm or something of those records, but they were lost. So people, GIs from the Second World War, for instance, that maybe deserved a Purple Heart, have to get somebody to vouch for them, and that's how they move ahead with a Purple Heart for them. And there were no records. The military medical records of Patton were destroyed there too. The only problem was with that theory is that I was watching the auctions pretty close, and Patton's toe tag turns up. It's on an auction, okay? And I'm praying Beck doesn't see it. and so I bet on it, and eventually I got it. And I was amazed. I knew Beck hadn't seen it. And so the minute I got it in my paws, and it says right on it, it says Patton George S. Jr., General U.S. Army, 60, from California, 42 years of service, joined when he was 18. And it says the young... or the colonel on there says he died of a broken neck, but more importantly on the back, the supplemental record, and there was no autopsy performed, which is another reason why it was questionable. Why didn't they perform an autopsy? Well, the young captain that actually did the dirty work and kept him alive wrote out in his own handwriting on the bottom of Patton's toe tag, December 19th, death rattles, given atrophy and oxygen. And on the 21st, the day he died, of December, resting quietly, but told several nurses he was going to die, and he died at 17:55 with sudden stop of the heart from myocardial failure, spinal cord damage, third cervical vertebrae. No autopsy, permission refused by Mrs. Patton on the death certificate, which answered that question. All answered by this simple little document. And so I wrote Glenn the next day, and I says, you might want to tell your friend Bill O'Reilly got it all wrong on Patton in his bestseller book, And all I got from Glenn was 3 words: wow, 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 like this, And then I got talked to a little bit about a week or so after that. There was Bill O'Reilly got into one of his fisticuffs over whether he had actually been under fire during the Falkland Islands War. I don't know if you remember that, but. There was Bob Schieffer that was down there in a hotel room with him. They weren't on the island, and says, well, he wasn't under fire, And that got picked up by Mother Jones News, which I didn't know was still around from the 60s, that demanded that they fire O'Reilly, This is before all the later stuff. And so Glenn had him on his show by phone. And I was told, get on YouTube and look at this, Ashworth. So I get on YouTube, and they just have the face of O'Reilly on the show, and they're listening to him. And Glenn says, Brian Williams had just been fired, you may recall, for saying he'd been under fire when he wasn't. What was the Afghan War or whatever. And so first thing Glenn says was, well, hi, Brian. I mean, Bill, how are you doing? of course, O'Reilly, it didn't take much to get him riled. And he went off on attacking Mother Jones News and everybody involved with this thing. And, you know, they should have been put out of their misery years ago. And this is a bunch of lies and all of that. And at any rate, Glenn stops and he says, oh, by the way, on a different subject, a friend of mine just found Patton's medical records, his autopsy report, and his show tag. And I'm thinking, oh, brother, you know. So there's this pause, and O'Reilly says, well, it establishes what's in my book, doesn't it? It supports my book. Well, you may want to read them. You know, like this. And then they go on talking about Falklands again, and then Glenn's hanging up the phone. This was only about a 5-minute conversation. And he says, look, next time in New York, I'm going to bring Patton's original medical records to your show and show you. You know, this kind of thing. And finally, my time's up. But this is we managed to get through these things. That's pretty good.
Good job.
Yeah. This is a flag. It was actually carried to the moon, and it's pictured in the book. It's an American flag that was carried to the moon by Apollo 11, assigned by Neil, Buzz, and Michael Collins. And I actually went to the surface of the moon. I've actually got 2 of these, which is amazing. But that's the one pictured in the book.
I'll take one.
Yeah. And then I've got a crew picture of them signed. To me, that's exciting. You know, I just I love to get things that have been somewhere I'm not going.
You never know.
Yeah. At any rate, I'd like to close by thanking Traci for doing a wonderful job. She did a marvelous job on this book, and she put up with me for 4 or 5 years, so that's pretty good. And she did an amazing job, and she should be honored for that. And I'm really grateful for Kurt. Thanks, you're a great friend, and I appreciate your opening up your house for us tonight. This has been a real honor. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, but thanks so much. That's for me.
Brent, all the things you see, tell me about the process you go through to determine authenticity. I don't know
Well,
if
that's interesting. We use a word in the trade which has become a lot more used since Hoffman, and that's provenance. And that's a fancy word to just say we try to get a genealogy on things as far as we can take them back. I was on the phone today with the church over. I don't think it'd be too out of place to mention this. With the Dibble seer stone, which was picked up by a friend of mine many years ago. He paid $75,000 for it. You'll remember that probably. And now he wants to donate, and they're talking about a number over $5 million for a donation. They want me to write it up, the appraisal. And I just thought, well, I've had such a hard time, frankly, getting numbers over 5,000 approved by the church. I thought I better call them. So I was on the phone driving up here today, and that's what I was doing. was trying to prove provenance to these guys. And they actually had established that they thought it was the correct one because of all the paperwork we've got, you know, due diligence, we call it in the law, that's been done over many years on this rock, this stone. And it's pretty amazing, and I think it is probably the Dibble stone, but I've got to write it up, and it's going to be my name on it if IRS decides to question it. Maybe I'll write Kurt's name on it. You know, when the numbers get that big, I hate to, you know, be the one on the line, but I may be the one on the line. It looks like everybody's voted me their favorite person to do this, so I guess I'm going to do it. But yeah, provenance is like our due diligence in the law. And you have to meet a certain standard. With Hoffman, we kind of threw those standards out the window, I guess, because although, you know, frankly, we went to people that were authorities to get all that stuff authenticated, didn't we?
Yep.
We did all that. We did all the right things, and they weren't true. They weren't authentic. So it gives one some thought. Ron, have you got thoughts on this? I know you're a big collector too. How do we prove provenance? You know, we try to get a genealogy.
It is just that. It's a genealogy.
Yeah.
It's finding, you know, mention of it maybe in a newspaper, you know, family histories.
Exactly.
Just those things that you know, people may have given a talk in church and somebody else wrote about it in the journal and then donated the journal to the church. It's amazing, but it is getting more and more difficult.
It is. It's getting tough, and there are gaps, and it's harder to get people to, part with that kind of information. It's getting tougher to find. But anyway, it's been interesting, and we've tried to improve it over time. But really valuable things, people want to know where they've been, and
Brent,
I think
a lot of times people want to know if they still go through scientific examination and analysis. And
well,
that
they
rarely
can,
happens. Tell
yeah,
them, tell
they
them
can.
that.
What happened? We had the Question Documenter Examiners of America met in 2005 in honor of the 20th anniversary of Mark Hoffman here in Utah. They're a group of about 500. That's all they are nationwide. These are the creme de la creme of the people that know documents. We had one of those in the state at the time of the Hoffman deal, George Throckmorton. And George was working for David Wilkinson as the AG when he was Attorney General. And at any rate, he got himself permission to come down and help the city and the county with this big investigation. First bombing deaths in Utah, so they had over 200 officers from federal, state, and local that got involved with this. And he asked me to be the keynote speaker at the 20th anniversary. I think that's because they wanted a dumb guy that'd been taken by Mark to kind of set the tone. And I says, look, I'll agree to be the dumb guy if you're not going to get hurt. But I'm just advertising. I'm sorry. I gave you a little advertising, paying you back. Any rate, but I'll do it on one condition. That is, I can sit down with you guys at lunch and find out what's new the last 20 years, okay? Because I spent a lot of time with the cops years ago, like we all did, and I'd like to know what developments have taken place. So I gave my speech, and when it was done, I got to eat with these top guys in the country around a table. My first question out of my mouth was, are there any tests yet for pencil? And because pencil is the chosen weapon of choice to a good forger, because there are no tests, or at least there weren't in during the Hoffman era. All there are comparative tests, comparing the handwriting. There are no scientific tests, okay, for pencil. There are different kinds of pencil, but you know, if they go to the era, pencils go back to the beginning of the country. Thoreau had a pencil factory. I mean, you know, pencils are as old as the country. And they said no, there's no new tests on pencil. So that answered that one. About half the Hoffman things were not charged because they were done in pencil. The ones that were charged were all done in ink. And there are a number of tests for ink, but you know, they're not, many of them aren't as foolproof as you might think. And Hoffman figured out one ingredient of iron gall ink, which was the typical ink used during the 19th century, which he found out what it was from a chemistry set. You remember this? That he picked up for his son from Cottonwood Mall when it was around. I mean, the guy was brilliant for being so stupid, okay? And even the authorities, the feds, didn't know what that one ingredient was, and they found out what it was after they found the chemistry set. And it had it listed there. It was some kind of magenta or something, I can't remember. But it was amazing how that was tracked down. And you know, Hoffman passed a lie detector, not that others haven't passed it, but he had a unique way of doing it. Where we had Raskin, the expert, come to our law class, didn't we? And to tell us that it was foolproof depending on the operator. I think that was basically what he told us. I was a prosecutor for a few years, and I know we relied somewhat on that from time to time. And but you know, Hoffman got around it, and the state bar wanted to know how, and they did an issue. I think it had Governor Matheson's picture on it, because I've still got it, of an interview with Hoffman out of the prison. And he said, he'd basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically he put a rock between his big toe and his next toe and put all of the pressure on that rock and those toes, which changed his pressure, okay? Just the test for lie detectors. And he passed his lie detector test, okay? So there are ways around it if you're smart enough or dumb enough to try. And that was awesome. Any other questions? I've probably gone on too long, but this has been fun. Enjoyed it.
Anybody?
Have I turned away some of your customers?
I wondered if you had anything that was written to Jonathan Dunham.
Oh. Yeah, I didn't bring that one, but we all know what that was.
Read the books. Yeah. And read Brent's book. Read Traci's book. This has been delightful, and boy, the crowd has grown with time. We want to thank our two special guests tonight. Let's give them another round of applause.